Okay, and welcome back, students who are taking financial accounting, and we're working on the Chapter 4 exercises Group B that were assigned in the digital study guide. And as always, if you don't understand, it's about understanding an application. If you're not understanding, if you look at the solution and you're not getting the solution, I mean, watching these videos for these worked out problems is showing the application part. If you're going through this and you don't understand why things are happening, okay, then that means you're not understanding the theory, and that means you should go back and watch, the theory videos, and realize that some things are not just, oh, it's just, I'm working on chapter 4, so I have to watch chapter 4 theory. No, counting is cumulative, all right? So, like in the last video, I had referred that uh, you know, in chapter 2 and 3, we created a balance sheet and an income statement. But yet now, when we're doing problems 4-32, 4-33, and 4-34, those financial statements look very different from what we learned in, chapter 2 and chapter 3. That's because we're building one upon the other, and it's becoming more expansive and more complex. So going back and watching theory videos, you can't just say, oh, I'm going to go and watch, chapter 4. Realize that you're going to have to go back to, previous chapters and pick up information that you lost along the way if you're not understanding something. And even after watching those videos, if you don't get it, instructors are here to guide you and to help you understand. Okay, you need to have that understanding before you can actually do the application. All right, so feel free to contact an instructor if you need to. Right, so this last problem here that we have to do is for the exercises, okay, is 4-35. It says here, Alliance Software had revenue of 67,000, returns and allowances of 2.8, and sales discounts of 1.6. So immediately, in my mind, I'm kind of thinking, okay, what's my net sales revenue, all right? Because I know that I have sales revenue of 67 mil. Returns and allowances of 2.8, and discounts of 1.6. I mean, this is just going in, and this is just what I'm thinking about as I'm reading the problem. When you're doing, when you're working with accounting, you read slowly and you think about everything that's being presented, and you try to keep in the back of your mind other information. It's like tools in a toolbox. It's all there, and you uh, kind of if you understand the concepts, you know where everything is placed, and you can infer certain things from that information and fill in the gaps to try to make that the information in those concepts more complete. In this case here, it didn't tell us what. Let me get, come on, pen. All right, it didn't tell us what our net sales revenue is, right? But I know that I can actually calculate that out, which is 62.6 million. Okay. Um, I can infer that. Now, will I use that information? I don't know. Okay. All I'm doing is when I'm reading this, I'm just saying, okay, has revenue of 67 million, returns and allowances, and sales discounts. Okay. That's as far as I had gotten. I have no idea what the rest of the problem says, but in the back of my mind, I've already, uh, thought through this process, even though I didn't do the, I don't have to do the math there. I just have to keep the concept in mind. Okay. So then it says cost of goods sold was 31 million. So, if I'm at 62.6 and I have to, take out my cost of goods sold of 31 million, right? That gives me a gross profit of 31.6 million, right? Um, and then it says, and again, this is, this gross profit figure is just something that's in the back of my head, okay? And then it says it has net income of 9 million. Well, how do I get down to net income here of 9 million, all right? Well, when I have my gross profit, I have to take out all of my other expenses. So what's the difference between the net income of 9 million and 31.6? That's 22.6 million of expenses that I had. Notice how I'm just, I understand the concept of having revenues less cost of goods sold gives me a gross profit. I take out expenses, and that gives me my profit or loss. I mean, that's the concept. And if I'm being given information here, I'm trying to have that framework in the back of my mind, and even though I'm not plugging the numbers in like I was doing down here, I'm cognizant of where that information is going and coming from, so that depending upon what's being asked in the problem, I can figure out what it is that I need in order to solve what it's asking me for. Okay. It says here the average number of shares of common stock outstanding was 600,000 shares. Right, so I'm going to erase some of this, but I'm going to put net sales revenue of 62.6 million here. I'm going to put my gross profit number here of 31.6 million, and I'm going to put my expenses here of 22.6 million, only because I may or may not need that, right, for whatever the problem is asking me. Okay, so it says here, compute Alliance's earnings per share, gross profit percentage, and net income percentage. Okay, so this here basically is, in the last part of the chapter, the focus on decision making, that section of the chapter. So, if you need to go back to that section in order to see the formulas and see an example of it worked out, right? But at this point in time, there is a theory video on how I, think, even though I didn't work through the formulas, I gave some additional insights in how I think about working through these formulas and how I can end up remembering them and using whatever it is that I need to use. So if I'm going to work with earnings per share, this is basically earnings over shares, right? Over your shares of, your average, they're showing average shares. Okay, so as part of the solution, which is true. Okay, it is average shares, but they're adding in the word average only because your shares, you're purchasing them at different times during the course of the accounting period, and they're taking an average here, kind of like saying you have to be cognizant of, you can't just look at one number. All right, if you have other information, you end up taking an average of shares in order to get the number of shares and used for the earnings per share calculation. I know that's, taking that word average just caused me to it caused me to explain something that might get a lot people a little bit more confused, since we only have 600,000 shares here, and I really don't need to have an average because it's telling me what the average number of shares is. So earnings per share is your earnings divided by your number of shares, and in this case here it happens to be an average. So what are my earnings? Okay, my earnings is my net income, which was 9 million. So I have 9 million, and the number of shares is 600,000. So I divide 9 million by 600,000, and I end up with $15 per share. And that's earnings per share. Okay, now for the gross profit percentage and net income percentage. Gross profit percentage and net income percentage, right? Remember the way if you watch the theory videos, I know that the numerator for both of these is going to be net sales revenue. And so my net sales revenue here. So that's going to be the same number for both of those. But the way I distinguish one from the other is because this is gross profit. Well, that's what goes in my numerator, gross profit. And my net income percentage, the net income goes into the numerator. That's how I remember these. I associate one with the other. I don't have to memorize two different formulas. So if I have a gross profit of, and we actually had to calculate it out. Now remember, it's not being, gross profit wasn't given in here. And you saw me go through all of that calculation in these last, 10 minutes on creating this additional information. Well, here for my gross profit, we actually need, that information. So when you're working with a word problem, remember, you always have information that's directly related to solving the problem. You have information that has nothing to do with solving the problem, and you have information that has to be, changed or manipulated, all right, in order to get information to solve the problem. In this case here, we don't have gross profit, so we have to manipulate the data in order to arrive at, information that we can use. And then that was part of what I was doing before. I knew the concepts. I actually worked through the numbers, and I came up with 31.6 million as my gross profit, right? If you're just trying to take in, if you're just going to try and take information from here, you're going to get it wrong, because you actually have to do some math in order to be able to get that figure. And of course, the same thing with my net sales revenue, okay? I had to figure out what my net sales revenue was. In that case, it was 62.6 million. So I wouldn't be able to actually figure out gross profit percentage from this data here directly, okay? It doesn't tell me directly what gross profit is, and it doesn't tell me directly what net sales revenue is. I actually have to look through the information here and decide what is not applicable and what information has to be manipulated in order to get the information I need, which is this 31.6 and the 62.6. Okay, so that ends up being, when I divide that, I end up with a percentage of 50.4% for my gross profit, right? Now, when it comes to the net income, all right, yeah, I'm being told what my net income is of 9 million, okay? That's information that's directly used, okay? But again, the sales revenue, right, has to be manipulated. I have to actually figure out that number, right? And so when I get the 9 million divided by 62.6 million, I end up with 14.3%. Okay, so for this problem, okay, the big takeaway here for this problem is, we know that here's these ratios and formulas that we need to use when we're making decisions. I explained how I think about gross profit and net income percentages to make remembering them so much easier, okay? But also, two, when you're looking at a word problem and you're reading it, think about the entire concept and, fill in the blanks, okay? And taking that information and filling in the blanks is manipulating that data, it's rearranging the data, it's getting other useful pieces, so that when you actually look at what the problem is asking, all right, in this case here, gross profit percentage or net income percentage, from the data, you're going to have information that's directly related to whatever is being asked. And remember, what's being asked for gross profit is different from net income. You also have information that has nothing to do with that particular question being asked, meaning net income has nothing to do with gross profit, okay? So even though you're given this 9 million, you don't need that when you're looking at gross profit, right? And you also have information that has to be changed or manipulated, right? You have to do some kind of mathematical calculation in order to be able to arrive at information that is useful. And that's what we ended up doing with gross profit and then the net income, because we had to do some math to figure out what the gross profit was and what the net sales revenue was, right? So when you're working through the word problem, just realize that depending upon what the question is asking, you're going to have to make these decisions. and you're going to have to do that math. And if you're not manipulating or changing the data, and you're only dealing with directly and what's not applicable, oftentimes you're going to get the information wrong. You're going to get the wrong answers, the wrong solutions. Okay. All right, so that's it for this video, and actually that's it for this section of the assigned problems. In the next set of videos, we will then start working on the problems that were assigned for this chapter. Okay, and as always, if you don't understand something, feel free to contact an instructor.